Moving forward, ladies and gentlemen, as we embark on this highly anticipated segment of TIM 4.0, it's my privilege to introduce someone who stands at the pinnacle of scientific research and technological advancements. Our keynote speaker today is a name that resonates with both brilliance and innovation across the global scientific community. Dr. Rajnish Kumar, a distinguished faculty member of IIT Madras, is truly a star in the field of chemical engineering. His groundbreaking contributions in areas like methane recovery, carbon capture, and sustainable water purification have not only earned him national recognition, but have also placed him among the world's most influential scientific minds, as named by Clarivate Analytics in 2018. For those of us who look up to exemplary achievements, Dr. Kumar's journey is a remarkable testament to the spirit of discovery. Among his many accolades, Dr. Kumar was awarded the Shantiswarup Bhatnagar Prize in 2022, a recognition often hailed in the same league as India's Nobel Prize for Technology. This award, a symbol of excellence in multidisciplinary science, is given to individuals who have made exceptional contributions to human knowledge. Dr. Kumar's pioneering work on clathrate hydrates on CO2 sequestration is transforming our understanding of unconventional energy resources, and her research is shaping the future of sustainable technologies. At a time when global maritime industry is grappling with the pressing challenge of carbon capture and the transition to alternative fuels for propulsion, there is an urgent need for clear vision and direction. Despite significant strides being made, questions about the future remain. How will ships be powered in the coming decades, and what role will emerging technologies play in this transformation? This is where today's keynote becomes so critical. Dr. Rajnish Kumar, with his deep expertise and pioneering research in sustainable energy solutions, is perfectly positioned to shed light on the advancements in this area and offer us a glimpse into what lies ahead. It is with great pleasure that I welcome our esteemed keynote speaker, Dr. Rajnish Kumar, to enlighten us on these crucial topics. Dr. Rajnish, please come on stage. And now I'll invite Captain Sankalp Shukla. Yeah. Okay, let's list.
This is the pointer? Yeah. Okay. Then I will not use mine. I was bringing mine. Okay. And we don't have a collar mic? No. Okay. Fine. No problem. I have been told that I have 25 minutes, and after that there will be 5 minutes of discussion. So please remind me when I am done with my 25 minutes. Excuse me. Please remind me when I am done with my 25 minutes. Okay. Okay. Moving on. So I assume this is moving forward. So the title of the talk today, which I am going to give, is on what it takes to be net zero by 2070. And why 2070? Because I'm sure most of you would know that our Honorable Prime Minister has committed that India would become net zero by 2070. So we will try to understand what is exactly net zero. And then we will also understand what are the CO2 footprint of the two prime options which is available to us if one has to go for net zero. One is to moving from fossil fuels to renewables, and the other is basically doing carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration for in those cases where there is no option of moving from fossil fuel. Okay, so moving on, let's look into the challenge. What exactly was the challenge? So if you look into this, the global CO2 emission has been increasing year after year, and I am deliberately using data over here which is little dated. The reason is, okay, so this data was published in 2018. The reason why I am basically giving you this data, at that time we predicted that by 2020 there would be an imminent peak in CO2 emission, global peak in CO2 emission. But today still the CO2 emission has not really decreased or has not reached the peak yet. And there is a prediction that the peak might happen sometime in 2030. So it basically means we have been predicting that the CO2 emission will either stop or will come down after some point of time, but that's not happening yet. So let's try to understand, when we have committed to become net zero by 2070, what challenges we are going to face and how we will have to basically do these kind of predictions to ensure that when we are doing this, identifying solutions to reach net zero, we are not really overshooting. It basically means what has to be done today, it has to be done today. If we try to do it 10 years down the line, we may not be able to basically reach that target of 2070, which has been there in front of us. So the target of 2070 or 2050, US basically has a target of 2050, Europe has a target of 2050, some other countries have a target of 2060. In India, we have a target of 2070. Let's try to understand what exactly this target is about and why we have such targets. So there was a challenge at some point of time that the temperature, the global average temperature is actually increasing, and there was a potential that it would increase above 1.5 degree or 1.5 degrees beyond pre-industrial temperature limits. Okay? So some point of time, there was a target that we should be able to achieve this 1.5 degree. It basically means that the amount of CO2 which we will be emitting into the atmosphere will be capped somehow so that we will be able to go around 1.5 degrees beyond this number, that is pre-industrial temperature. And if you look into this particular data, currently the world emission is roughly 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year, which is increasing at the rate of 1% every year. And because we have been emitting this CO2 into the atmosphere, the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere has been rising, roughly 2 to 3 ppm every year. And because of that, the temperature of the global temperature is basically rising. So the number was calculated, and it was found that if there is going to be 250 billion tons of CO2 more into the atmosphere, the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere will be such that the global average temperature will be 1.5 degrees beyond the pre-industrial level. So now if you look into the maths, you see here 40 billion tons which we emit currently, and if the budget for 50% of the chances to be at 1.5 degrees is only 250 billion tons. It basically means that if we don't do anything today, in next 6 years, we will be emitting 250 billion tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So if we are going to have this 1.5 as target, unfortunately, we have already missed the bus. I don't think, or no one actually today believe that we are going to be within this 1.5 degree range. It basically means that if I have to be within a 1.5 degree range, the maximum amount of CO2 which we will emit or we can emit from today is only 250 billion tons. That basically is, per today data, is only 6 years of budget. Okay? Now, it means we are not able to reach 1.5 degrees. What it would take to reach 2 degrees, or what we will have to do to basically how much CO2 will have to cut down so that we reach this 2 degrees target, either beyond 2050 or much later than that. So if you look into these numbers, if we emit another 1150 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, there will be a 50% chance that we will breach this number of 2 degrees centigrade compared to what it was pre-industrial era. Now, if you are looking into 1150 ton, it's not a target for 2050 or 2070, it's basically your overall target. 2500 also, we should not be emitting more than 1150. So from here onward, the only target we have is to somehow emit as less carbon dioxide as possible, so that sometime in future, depending upon how long you want to be alive, we can have only maximum 1150 billion tons of CO2 being emitted to the atmosphere. The rate at which we are currently emitting, 40 billion tons per year, basically mean that by 2050 we will hit this target of 2 degrees. Basically it means we have up to 2050 to reduce our CO2 emission so that we emit much lesser than 1150 billion ton, and we have still some CO2 left with us, or some CO2 budget left with us, so that we can live beyond 2050. This is the challenge which we have currently. Let's look into what are the solutions we have, or what are the solutions actually which we talk about are two types of solutions. One is moving from fossil fuel based to renewable. And it has been said that as we move to renewable, we will become net CO2 zero. So today we will try to understand, is it really that simple? Okay. So let's look into the next data. If I have to basically go from whatever currently we are doing in each of these industries, and we start looking into reduction of CO2 emissions. See, the target here is minimum. We have to reduce 50% of our total CO2 emission from today onward. It basically means that if 40 billion tons of CO2 is being generated around the world today, if I cut down by 50% from today, it basically means if next year only 20 billion tons of CO2 is being emitted, in 25 years, we will still emit 500 billion tons of CO2. And there is still some percent of, it basically means that if you are emitting 500 billion tons of CO2, we will still have some chance of becoming 2 degrees. So the question here is, even if I have to reduce 500, 700 billion tons of CO2 emission from today onward till 2050, what challenge we are facing? Okay, this is the main question. If we talk about power industry, what has power industry will have to do? It will basically have to move from fossil fuel to renewables. What else? It has to basically do carbon dioxide capture, utilization and sequestration. And then there is some portion which will ultimately move to nuclear. If we talk about other industries, steel industry, cement industry, these are some of the options. I don't want to go in too much of detail. Let me tell you what we are trying to show over here. Depending upon which industry you belong to, you will have to basically identify a tailor-made solution for that particular industry. Shipping industry on average produces roughly 2.5% of total CO2 emission. So this is also a significant number, and one has to really worry how we will make shipping industry carbon dioxide neutral. Today I'm not going to specifically talk about shipping industry. I'm going to give you an idea what exactly is the challenge, why this is going to be a big challenge. And most of the time when we see the media or the scientific literature talking about that we have solved this puzzle, actually it's not true. Now, the first option is that we will move from non-renewable to renewable. So the question is that how India has done in terms of renewable, whether we have done really good. We talk about that India being an agrarian country should have huge amount of bio-waste, and we should be able to utilize those bio-waste to produce electricity and solve some of these problems. So let's look at the data which is shown in this particular slide. If you look into the data over here, it clearly shows that in 1985, we were having more number of energy coming from renewable than what it is coming today. At some point of time, around 2000, we were as low as 12% renewable in our energy mix. So what I was trying to tell that moving from fossil fuel to renewable is easier said than done. It takes a lot of effort, and it's not that easy to move from non-renewable to renewable in a very short period of time. This data tells us that from last 30 years, we have not moved an iota. We have not moved at all. We have in fact come down from what we were utilizing in 1980s. So this is one challenge, and because of that, you will see that the CO2 emission in India is increasing day by day. Currently, there is a rise of 5% every year. We are producing 3 billion tons of CO2 every year in India alone. It is 3 billion tons, it's not 3 tons. 3 billion tons of CO2 is being produced by India every year, and it is increasing at the rate of 5% every year. So if you don't do anything, 10 years down the line, you will be basically producing 6 billion tons of CO2 every year. This is the challenge which we have to basically somehow, even if we have to cut down 50% of this CO2 emission, that is from the 3 billion tons which we are currently emitting, if we have to make it 1.5 billion tons every year, it will basically mean you will have to somehow cut down 2 billion tons of CO2 emission every year. So that has to be kept in mind, the number, the scale. I saw one of the students, Prasant, I guess his name was, he was talking about some CO2 capture project in one of the model he showed. So the challenge here is about the quantity we are talking about. In the lab, many of these things certainly work, but whether we can scale it up or what kind of challenges we will face while we scale it up is something which we'll have to worry about. So now you see here the CO2 emission is like almost asymptotic to the y-axis. It basically means we are basically going on a trajectory which will be very difficult for us to bring it down. The numbers are staggering. So let's try to understand both of these aspects. First, renewable. So now people say, oh, let's not worry about renewable. There is a messiah available in terms of solar energy, photovoltaics, solar panels. We talk about PV solar panels. So we will be able to move away from coal and oil and all kind of fossil fuel. We will only take solar energy and convert it into electricity, and all our problem will be solved. Let's look at the number, how the numbers looks like, whether we are solving some problem or we are creating some new problem. Let's look at this data. This is the data of solar installations in India. We will not worry too much about whether we have been able to reach our targets or not. What I am going to worry about is this. The plant load factor of solar to electricity is roughly 18 to 20%. What is this plant load factor? It basically means if you have installed 1 unit of solar panels, basically if you have installed solar panels to produce 1 kilowatt hour of electricity, since there is only 20% time sunshine is available, you will be able to produce only 20% of this much installed capacity. So this is called plant load factor. If I am going to install for certain amount, we know that only 20% of the time this solar panel is going to give electricity. Remaining 80% of the time there is no sunshine, so it will not be able to give electricity to us. So the challenge here is now, how do we increase this plant load factor? Typical plant load factor of a coal-based power plant would be like 80 to 85%. And if I have to move from 20% to say 60, 65%, one has to almost rely on storage of electricity. Storage of electricity can be done in two ways. Majorly, it can be done in two ways. One is batteries, and the other is converting electricity into hydrogen by electrolysis of water. Okay, the next talk I believe is on hydrogen, so we'll give you more data on that. Let's not talk about batteries today. It's not something which I want to talk about today since we have limited time. Let me talk about hydrogen. How does the hydrogen looks like? If I have to convert all my electricity, so basically what I have to do, I have to create the solar panel 5 times what it is required, because only the plant load factor is only 20%. So 5 times of what it is required. So I'll have to install, instead of 1 kilowatt hour, I'll have to install 5 kilowatt hour and store the remaining 4 kilowatt hour for the remaining 18 hours of the day, so that we will be able to use it during the non-sunshine hour. Now this is the challenge. This can be done by batteries or by converting this into hydrogen, and it is assumed that hydrogen will be converted back into electricity when we need, either at the same site, or we will have to transport it, or we will have to store it and transport it for longer distances. So let's look at the math. How does it looks like? Okay. So math tells you that the best of the electrolyzer today will be able to produce 55 kilowatt hour of 1 kilo of hydrogen by utilizing 55 kilowatt hour of electricity. So if I have to produce 1 kg of hydrogen, 55 units of electricity will get consumed in electrolyzing the water, basically splitting the water. Let's do other math. Today, what is the cost of electricity typically we pay? 10 rupees a unit. So it basically means right here it is 555 rupees per kilogram of hydrogen. How many of us will be able to pay that? That's the first question. Let's move on. Let's assume we can pay. What is the challenge? Next challenge. As soon as I am converting my water into hydrogen, the next problem I will have to face is to store it and transport it. Even if you want to transport it to up to 100 kilometers, I'm not talking about 5,000 kilometers, which typically LNG is transported from US to India and all. Even up to 100 kilometers you want to transport, it will cost you another 10 to 15 kilowatt hour of electricity. So what basically mean that you have already consumed 70 kilowatt hour of electricity for your 1 kilogram of hydrogen. And when you convert back this 1 kilogram of hydrogen with the best of the fuel cell available today, now fuel cells you know is very expensive, not many people can afford it, but let's say I am converting all my hydrogen by utilizing the best of the fuel cell available today, I am only getting back 15 to 25 kilowatt hour of electricity. So what is the plant load factor here? It's not much better than what I was talking about for the solar panel itself. So it basically means it's not only in the solar panel we will have to install 5 times more solar panel. Here also I'll have to actually create 5 times more capacity to capture all those so that I will be able to utilize that much of electricity which I need. So this is a big challenge. The challenge comes, why I am worried about all this installation? I am worried about this installation because the solar panels are made up of multiple molecules. I am a chemical engineer, I am from science, I'll tell you as a molecule, but you can understand it's a material. Okay, so multiple molecules are there. You will need glass, you will need plastics, you will need aluminum, you will need silicon, you will need copper, you will need silver and other metals, and you will also need steel and cement because you will have to mount the solar panel. So you will need all of these, and the challenge is because of this. If I have to convert 1 terawatt hour of electricity by burning a fossil fuel, I only need so much of material, 1,000 tons of material. Because the energy density of fossil fuel is much higher, it has been cooked by the nature for millions of years. So you have a very dense energy available to you, you burn it and you get lot of energy, and this is one of the main reasons why it becomes very difficult for you to move from fossil fuel to any other form of energy. But if I am going to generate similar amount of energy by solar panel, I need 16,000 tons of material. Now let me tell you, if I am going to produce steel or cement today, typical numbers for the process itself, forget about the mining part, the process itself, 1 kg of steel when you are converting from ore to steel, it emits 3 kilograms of carbon dioxide. This is just the process emission. If I am using fossil fuel to melt all the ore and do all the processes to convert this into steel, 1 kg of steel will produce 3 kilograms of carbon dioxide. Now, first multiply this 16,000 into 5 because the plant load factor is only 20%, and then multiply that by 3. So that is the number you are basically talking about CO2 emission the day you have basically put your solar panel on the ground. Okay, this CO2 emission is not coming because from the fossil fuel only emits when you burn it. So the CO2 emission which comes from the installation of the facility is not counted. So I'm not saying that fossil fuel is better than this. Let me tell you, while you are producing the electricity, this does not produce any more CO2. All the CO2 which you have emitted today, you can divide it over next 20 years, and then you will see that the CO2 footprint of the solar panel, you will be able to recover after, say, 7 years or so. Okay, so today if you have put a solar panel, don't expect it to become CO2 neutral the day you have put the solar panel. For next 7 years, you have already emitted the carbon dioxide. Now for some reason, if you say 7 years down the line, no, my solar panel is not efficient enough, I need to change it to a better solar panel which is currently available, then you are no more net CO2 zero. Please be aware of that. So it happens, and it happens regularly, that our technology improves significantly. 7 years is a long period of time, and I'll tell you the solar panels which were installed some 10 years back is currently people are thinking about replacing it. So please be aware that when we do such kind of a change from one panel to the next panel, assuming that our efficiency will improve, we are not becoming net zero there. So this is something which I wanted to tell you, that this is true not only for solar panel, it's also for hydropower or wind. So please be aware, when we say renewable, does not mean that there is no CO2 footprint. When we say hydrogen, it does not mean that there is no CO2 footprint. Hydrogen, for that matter, in India means that if I am producing 1 molecule of hydrogen, and in the process if I am producing 2 molecules of CO2, this hydrogen is considered to be green. There are no such process though. Do a proper life cycle analysis and you'll figure it out that minimum 4 molecules of CO2 will come out if you're producing 1 molecule of hydrogen. So it's not true that this hydrogen which we have produced has become CO2 neutral. What we are trying to say net zero, this is where the question is. It's not about the technology, it's about net zero, whether I am becoming net zero or not. So in this process, we are becoming net zero after 7 years. This is something which we'll have to be careful with. Now let's move on. If I'm going to talk about CO2 capture, there are many processes from where you can capture CO2. But the fundamental science behind CO2 capture, I don't want to give you too much of technical talk over here. So depends on what is the concentration of CO2. And I'll tell you what exactly is the concentration dependence over here. When we talk about capturing CO2 directly from the air, we mean to say that I am going to capture one molecule of CO2 out of 2,500 other molecules. Okay, it basically means in this room, if there are 2,500 people sitting, I have to identify one person out of 25% in this particular room. Do you think it's easy job? It's not an easy job. And I'm not going and picking that guy or lady from this crowd. I will have to identify a material which has to be synthesized so that this material has a special property to identify that carbon dioxide molecule and captures this molecule when it is present along with other 2,500 molecule. This is something which is not an easy task. I'll tell you why it is not an easy task a little later. So the challenge is that if I have to capture this CO2, it's going to be hell lot of an energy intensive process. It cannot be very easy. Okay. Now there is another option that capturing CO2 even before it goes back to the atmosphere. We can capture CO2 from this point source, which we say that industry stacks, which are typically 10% CO2 to 30% CO2, depending upon what industry we are talking about. So if I'm talking about capturing one molecule of CO2 from 10 other molecules of other gases, it's much easier process, okay? Identifying one CO2 molecule sitting among 10 other molecules is a much simpler process. So the material which is required to be for over here to capture the CO2 is going to be much simpler. Let me explain you, since there is a lot of non-technical person sitting here. What we are trying to do is that this is a stack from where I am getting my CO2 and it has to be captured. Okay? Why it has to be captured, I'll talk to you about it in the later slide. But if it has to be captured, I am showing this particular CO2 molecule is a ball, orange ball, covered in a Velcro tape. Okay? And these are the other balls which are non-CO2 molecule. Let's assume it could be nitrogen and oxygen. So what is the challenge here? I have to capture this CO2 molecule out of the other molecule. It basically means I need a material which should be able to attract this Velcro covered ball. What do I need? I need a Velcro pad, okay, which will, once this material goes through this pad, since one of the ball is covered with a Velcro tape, will get stuck in this particular pad and all the remaining molecule will go out. So basically the challenge in this carbon dioxide capture process is identifying this pad. What should be the property of this pad, okay? Now let me give you another data. If I have to do this with one molecule of CO2 and 9-10 molecules of nitrogen, it's easier. But if I have to do this with one molecule of CO2 and 2,500 other molecules of nitrogen and oxygen, which is typically direct air capture, you will have to recycle it again and again. And what does that mean? It basically means the rate at which CO2 will be captured and the amount of energy which you are going to spend to recycle this gas again and again through this material will be a lot more than the amount of CO2 we are actually capturing in this particular process. So if you look into the data, I don't want you to read through all this data. I just want to tell you and focus on this. If I am going to capture a CO2 molecule from a mixture of other gases, I need a material. This is the take-home message. Now, if you look into the data, the best material today is shown here. 0.1 gram to 1 gram of CO2 per gram of the material. It basically means I need at least 1 gram of this material to capture 1 gram of CO2. Or I need 10 gram of this material to capture 1 gram of CO2. So now, what was my target in India? I am emitting 3 billion tons of CO2 every year. So what does that mean? Do we need to create 3 billion tons of a material, new material? Because if I am creating 3 billion tons of new material, depending upon what kind of material I'm talking about, 3 times we have to multiply that much CO2 I have already emitted. Okay? So the question here is, how do we do it? It's not about identifying a material which will have higher capture capacity, but it's about identifying a material which can be regenerated again and again. Okay, so if I am able to regenerate this material 10,000 times, then I am able to produce a smaller amount of material. The CO2 footprint of the material generation, it will be significantly low. Okay, 5 minutes. So this is one challenge which we will have to focus on. It's very important. So what I'm trying to say, that any process we are going to go about has to have a carbon balance. The carbon molecule, carbon dioxide molecule which I have captured from here or here, and ultimately when I'm putting it down over here under the earth or converting into some kind of synthetic fuel or cement, there is a limit. If I'm capturing one molecule, the entire process should emit less than one molecule. If it is not emitting less than one molecule of CO2, then we are not reaching net zero. This is something which we'll have to always understand. This is the challenge in net zero 2070 target or 2050 target. Right now, most of the people, they just talk about going about identifying a technology. They are not counting the CO2 where it is basically going. Now, since I have only 5 minutes left, I would just quickly move on and I'll give you a few examples, what people have done. And I somehow believe we are just following someone else. Let me show you this particular data over here. This is the largest direct air capture, which is called Mammoth Orca, which is in Iceland. This is the largest plant. Okay? You know how much CO2 it captures? It captures 4,000 tons of CO2 every year. How much is the number? 4,000 tons. And how much it is worth? It's 1 second worth of our CO2 emission. Okay? Now you tell me, how much CO2 has been produced while this footprint, what is the footprint you see, physical footprint of this plant? This plant has emitted more than 1 lakh ton of CO2 already. Tell me how you will become net CO2 zero unless and until this plant runs for more than 10 years, 15 years. Okay? So this is something which one has to always keep in mind. This is a fashion to just go behind. Oh, US is investing so much of money in direct air capture. Let's go and start doing that. Yeah, it might become feasible when all our energy comes from green, renewable energy. But that is not today. It will happen sometime late, but not today. Please be aware of this. There are many such examples. I don't want to go in too much of detail. I will show you some of the solutions which we have done in IIT Madras. And since I am running out of time, I will show you. This is one of the pilot plant which we have, which captures CO2, designed and developed at IIT Madras. We have solutions to capture CO2. Again, I am not claiming that it is net CO2 zero, neutral CO2 solution. This process also emits more CO2 than it actually captures. But this is the reality. Let me be very frank with you. So this is the reality of today. We are working on it like everyone else, and we hope that we will be able to come to a better solution at some point of time. The direct air capture, since there is a lot of interest in direct air capture, we have also developed a process for direct air capture. As we speak today, hundreds of these kind of plants has been already being installed by L&T across the country. So this is also a technology which we have delivered for L&T, and it's available. We have basically done complete analysis for this. And since this is not a technical talk, I will just move on. And I'll show you what we have done on CO2 sequestration. Once the CO2 has been captured, it has to be sequestered. So we have the right pilot plant where we have demonstrated how this CO2 could be sequestered under the earth. So that's all for today. All the discussion and all the work which we have done in the lab is done by these students. So let me thank them. And since I am also now heading the School of Sustainability, I would like all of you to basically come and discuss. We will be able to give a solution, right solution on the CO2 capture front or the net zero front in this particular process. Thank you very much. You can be in touch over email. I know I have taken more time, but still if there are few questions, I'll be able to handle it quickly. Looks like there is no question. It means everyone understood everything. Or it may mean that no one bothered about it. I will leave the positive for the next half an hour if you give me. I want to attract your attention, so this is what half an hour is only sufficient for that. If you want some positive, then you give me another half an hour, I'll tell you some positive stories. Over dinner, no doubt, we will discuss.
Thank you so much. Can we please have you on stage, sir? I would like to call Captain Shaukat Mukherjee and Captain Karan Kochar to come on stage and please present the memento.